will leave it to you, and you should be able to share your screen whenever you're ready.
Okay. If this works. Is it viewable? Seeable?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. This is our first annual research reception for the Micah Mason Foundation. I appreciate everybody coming out, both well-wishers and friends and family and supporters, and to all the researchers, and to the folks from the Children's Heart Foundation. I'm going to start off with Micah's story. So if you haven't heard it yet, you're going to get a little more detail. And if you have heard it, maybe you'll hear something you hadn't heard before. So Micah was born in late November 2015. And the picture there on the left is Micah, I'm pretty sure like right after he was born. I snapped a shot of them checking his heart. We did not know Micah had a heart condition when he was born. In 2015, I think the identification rate for in utero identification was around 50% or so. I think it's closer to 70 or 80% now. So they're a lot better at finding the heart defects on the ultrasound than they used to be. But we didn't know. So for us, the first couple of days in the hospital was like having a normal kiddo. The picture on the right is Maria when our daughter, who's 8 now, so Micah's 5, and that's her meeting Micah. She was pretty excited. So we're in the hospital for 2 days. We got checked out by the doctor. Janelle's doctor said, hey, we can go home if we wanted to, but insurance was going to pay for another night. And I was like, hey, I'll take some help in babysitting. And so we stayed the extra night, and thank God we did, because that morning the nurse noticed he turned a little blue or gray, and she took him to the the NICU, the neonatal ICU, and they ran tests there. And I can remember it. I'll remember this, it's one of those for the rest of my life things. I'm sitting in our room, and I've woken up, and I'm just sitting there alone. We're trying to figure out, when's Micah coming back, and the doctor comes in, and she looks nervous, right? And she looks at me and she asks, where's your wife? And Janelle at the time was getting changed, and so she says, well, okay, I've got some news, but I want to give it to you both at the same time. And so we sit down, and the million terrible things are running through my head at that point. And so I look at her and I say, okay, well, is he alive? And she said, yes, he's alive. I was like, okay, thank God. All right. Is he okay? And she said, no. And Janelle came out, and they eventually explained what his condition was. And so Micah has hypoplastic left heart syndrome, or HLHS. And effectively what it means is the left side of his heart didn't grow much. I'm sure the doctors could explain it a lot better than that, but that's what I tell people. Effectively, he's got half a heart. Micah's case was pretty severe. We were fortunate, and that's pretty much the only real cardiac issue he had. So he doesn't have a lot of other problems to go along with it, but his left ventricle basically did not grow. So that picture on the right is our hospital stay after we got to the children's hospital. So we moved from the regular hospital to the children's hospital. Micah had his first open heart surgery at 8 days after birth, and it's a full-on replumbing of the heart. And I could talk about it a little bit, but it's kind of crazy what they do. And, his heart's only acorn or walnut size at that point. And they basically replumb the whole thing. So after that, we went to the Cardiac ICU. We spent a month there. So we got to do Christmas in the Cardiac ICU, which Christmas at a children's hospital, if you're going to have to stay at a children's hospital, Christmas is not really a bad time. it's good music, lots of charity going on. So, and then for New Year's, we got to move to the neonatal, back to the neonatal ICU. We spent another month there and eventually went home. His time in the hospital, he spent mostly asleep. And so while we're there and we're worrying about him, we're also trying to find something to do. So one of the things I did was I researched his condition, try and find out what does the long-term outlook look like? What does our next year look like? 5 years, 10 years, what does this look like? And there's a lot of information about like what the first 5 to 6 years look like. But there's very little beyond that. And my conclusion was, okay, everything's going to be fine. And my wife, in her strong, silent way, eventually got through to me that, no, past that point, because she's a doctor, so past that point, there not being any information out there was not necessarily a good thing. And so we went looking for a little bit, and we kind of figured out that there were a lot of long-term issues with his condition that were going to either need to be solved or fixed. And I kind of went into, well, we need to do something about it mode. And so that's when I kind of went into the development of the Micah Mason Foundation. So this is sort of our one sentence tag. What if you only had half a heart? Children born with HLHS are going to face this question their whole lives because the circulation they've developed, the 3 core surgeries and the Fontan circulation, it's not a full repair. It gives them the ability to live beyond childhood, but into adulthood, there's still a lot of questions because these surgeries were only developed in the 70s and 80s, and the folks are only making it into adulthood now. So it was a question I wanted to get answered, so I formed a charity because that's what I wanted to do. So that's what we were trying to do, is figure out long term what could we do. And so there were a series of questions we needed to answer, and with the end result being like, what's the next step? Like if we have a Fontan and that gets us to 25 or 30 or 15 or whatever, what's the next thing that we need to get us to end of life, or to natural end of life? That's what we were going after. So once we were kind of in the game and had a charity, that's when I suddenly started finding all of the other charities on my Google searches, because for some reason I'm not that great at Google. So started running into other groups who were doing HLHS work or hypoplastic left heart syndrome work. Interestingly enough, the Children's Heart Foundation was one of the first charities we interacted with, and it's primarily because of Kelly and Jared. I know Jared's at least on this call, and they got us together to do one of the heart walks in DFW, and so we did that, and we saw Children's Heart Foundation does research, but it was broadly congenital heart defects. It wasn't specific to HLHS, and that was kind of our target. So we were like, okay, this is a good, we'll do the walks, we'll be involved, but I want to get more into specifics about Micah's condition. And so the first real big group I ran into was the NPCQIC, or the National Pediatric Cardiology Quality Improvement Collaborative. Say that 10 times fast. I can barely say it once, but it was formed in 2009. They do a lot of great work, and we volunteered with them for a little while, but their focus is primarily what do we have now in place, and how do we make that better? If we do X and it works 70% of the time, how can we do X and make it work 100% of the time? And that's their main focus. And they've been wildly successful in the interstage period, especially. They dropped mortality between first surgery and second surgery from 20% down to 5 or less than 5 now. So they're very good at what they do, but it's not a what comes next necessarily organization. It's what's going on now. But we were involved with NPCQIC, and while I was there, I met a man named Dr. Tim. Can't remember his last name now, but he works in the Mayo Clinic, and they had a project which eventually became HeartWorks. And HeartWorks is still an ongoing research project. And I thought, aha, I found a research project that is focused on HLHS, and it looks really promising and it's really cool. And I talked to him, and they're really well funded because Tom and Karen Wanak, I think, own like Ashley Park. So they've got what they need to move forward, and it's an ongoing research project, and that's good, like, very good. However, it's one project, and the solution they may end up developing, or solution, may not be what Micah needs when he needs the solution. And so, like, they're good, and I'm going to continue to watch them and see what they do, but where can we go? And that's kind of how we moved on to Cardiac Networks United, and finally back to the Children's Heart Foundation. So Cardiac Networks United is kind of what it sounds. It's these various cardiac organizations kind of grouping their data together in order to allow researchers, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Pasquali, in order to so they can do research quickly. Because the problem with rare conditions is that they're rare. And a hospital may only have a dozen cases or 100 cases of a particular disease like HLHS. And it's difficult to do research with only 100 cases. But if you can combine your cases and your data with the whole nation's worth of hospitals, then you can really do some real research. This was a problem that me and Nathan, one of the other founders of Cardiac, or of the Micah Mason Foundation, we went after, in part because of my talks to Dr. Tim Nelson from the Heart Foundation, or the Heart Builders, because it was a problem. There wasn't enough sharing going on. It was a problem that was big enough that me and Nathan actually put together a proposal to the National Science Foundation to build something like CNU. We didn't know CNU was happening yet. The National Science Foundation thought there was a lot of merit in the project. They just didn't think we were the ones that should have done it. And I can't disagree with them. But luckily, very fortunately, somebody was already doing it. And the reason I came into contact with CNU was through the Children's Heart Foundation last year, because everything went virtual. And, you know, it's still kind of virtual now. Like, they're all still on a Zoom call. We're all still zoomed out. You know, the Children's Heart Foundation started doing these virtual research receptions where they would bring researchers on and talk about the projects that the foundation had funded. And Cardiac Networks United was one of them, and me and Nathan attended. And I think we took up more than half of the question time in that, and asked what we told a lot of good questions. I hope they were good questions. And after that, the CEO of Children's Heart Foundation got in contact with us and talked with us about making a named fund, so in Micah's name, managed by the Children's Heart Foundation, but that would allow us to determine what research was funded. And that last bit is very important, because if you're a grant giving organization, then you have to receive grant proposals, and you have to be able to go through the grant proposals and figure out what's good and what's not and what's likely to succeed. And our organization is really not set up to do that, but the Children's Heart Foundation already had that in place. And so I think last year they received, like 57 proposals, and this year it's like 130, which is nuts.
We had a lot.
Yeah. So the board of they have doctors and scientists, researchers who review all of those grants or those proposals and determine which ones are most likely to succeed and which ones are most likely to do the most good. And then they provide those to us to determine, okay, these are the ones we're going to fund. So in the end, this gave us the best opportunity to go after research that was focused on Micah's condition, you know, without having to bring in the overhead of having to review grant proposals. So we formed a charity fund in Micah's name, the Micah Mason Research Fund. And so and that's been established now. And this is sort of the kickoff meeting where we tell everybody about it. So thank you all for coming. But, that's all I got. Take it away, Jessica.
Perfect. Do you want to, I'm going to stop sharing your screen.
Oh, got to do that. There we go.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Patrick, and thank you everyone for joining us. It's so good to see so many faces and support here tonight. I'm going to introduce one of our actually MAC members, our Medical Advisory Council members. She is the chief she's a service chief of cardiology at University of Michigan at CS Mont, Dr. Sara Pasquali, and she also, you know, scores our applications when we were in that season. So it is research season now. So I welcome Dr. Pasquali. So.
Thanks so much, Jessica. Thanks, Patrick, and everyone for having us. We're really excited to be here. Want to tell you a little bit more about Cardiac Networks United to add to what Patrick said, which you got it exactly right, Patrick. And then you're going to hear some more. I'm just going to briefly do an introduction. You're going to hear a lot more about some exciting work that's already happening through our collaboration from Dr. Pettit, Dr. Chanani, and Dr. Algaze. So they're going to present to you some things that are kind of hot off the press in terms of projects that are happening right now. So I think that'll be the most exciting part to hear. So I'm gonna keep mine pretty brief. But some of my colleagues couldn't join us tonight, are either stuck in the hospital or out of town. But I direct Cardiac Networks, co-direct with my colleagues Michael Gaze and Jeff Anderson. So presenting this on behalf of them. And then I believe Dr. Andrea Less is with us on the phone as well. She's our project manager, does amazing work. And then Katie Clark Myers, I don't believe could join us. She's our other project manager as well from Cincinnati. So that's kind of our entire team. But to give you just a little bit more background in terms of what Patrick mentioned, the volume of data that's been available to us in the congenital cardiac world has really exploded over the past 10 years. There's now multiple different research registries and networks and other entities that collect a lot of information on patients with congenital heart defects like Micah's. But the question has been raised, are we really able to effectively use all of this information to drive scientific discovery and then translate that into improvements in care at the bedside for children who are in the hospital or in the clinic or dealing with congenital heart disease in their families? And unfortunately, in many cases, when we really dove into this, we had to say the answer was unfortunately no. And that's because we were functioning really in a bunch of disconnected silos. Each sort of research group and network or data collection registry had kind of their own way of doing things, and we weren't necessarily connected together. And what that led to was several different limitations. First of all, it was just inefficient to all have our own way of doing things that wasn't really connected. Second of all, is it really limited the type of science we could do and the types of questions we could answer, because we were just focused on one sort of piece of the puzzle, but not really understanding what happens, as Patrick said, across the lifespan. You know, it's great if we understand what happens to you when you're in the intensive care unit, but even better if we understand, well, what's happening 5 or 10 years down the road and how can we improve those outcomes. It also limited our ability to take what we were learning from a scientific perspective and then apply that to, you know, actual patients who we're caring for right now, and how do we, you know, improve what's happening to them, you know, sort of in real time at the bedside, to translate what we're learning from a scientific perspective to improving care more rapidly. And then it also offered few solutions because there was little collaboration across these groups and across different types of scientists to really develop solutions to meet a lot of these challenges. So with that in mind, Cardiac Networks United was born back now in 2017, so a relatively new organization. And the goal was really to improve and accelerate what we're able to do from a scientific standpoint and from an improvement standpoint through collaborating together and joining forces. And so we started off with 5 different research networks who joined forces initially, and recently, just over the course of the past year, expanded now to 7. So we have a really broad reach. These networks expand multiple different phases of care, from the inpatient or hospital world to the outpatient and follow-up world, and kind of everything in between. Our networks represent more than 85 different children's hospitals across the country. So that's about 2/3 of all of the congenital heart programs in the United States. And really, this data has grown to be the most comprehensive collection of data on congenital heart patients that exists in the world. So it's really a wealth of resources and knowledge that can be applied to hopefully solve some of our most challenging questions in this area. We also integrate with a variety of other initiatives and other sources of data. So you're going to hear a little bit more from Dr. Pettit about how we're helping to foster different clinical trials through some of our work with the Pediatric Heart Network. We create different research modules to answer certain questions across our network. So incorporating different data about mothers and babies even before the babies are yet to be born. Another example is different data about the kidneys for a project that really wanted to understand how the kidneys are impacted in kids with heart disease. And then some fancy new technology, all the data, for example, that's captured on different heart monitors. I'm sure you remember, Patrick, when Micah was in the ICU, the millions of different monitors that were surrounding him. How do we make sense of all the data that's captured in those monitors, but that we may not be using effectively? And then really branching out, not just to the short term, but the long term. We have a unique portal that we created where we're able to contact patients and families directly over time to understand how their children are doing over the long term and the challenges that we're facing. In order to accomplish the work of Cardiac Networks United, you'll hear a little bit more about these entities in the presentations you're going to hear next, but we have a data and analytic core that's based at the University of Michigan. That's what is sort of the data engine that helps to collect all these data and merge it together for all of our research projects. And then that's led by my colleague, Micah Algaze. And then we have also an improvement core that's based at Cincinnati Children's Hospital that's led by Jeff Anderson, and really takes advantage of the expertise they have there to translate what we're learning from a scientific perspective and really apply that to improving care. And the project Claudia is going to present will show you a little bit more about how that works as well. So we're really, again, excited to be here. Look forward to any questions you may have. I'm going to turn the rest of this over to my colleagues who are going to tell you some more about these ongoing projects. But we really, again, want to thank the Children's Heart Foundation for all of their support. And thank you, Patrick, as well, for inviting us to be here for your reception, and look forward to learning more.
Thank you, Sara, so much, Dr. Pasquali, sorry, so much for sharing that intro to CNU. And, you know, it's our pleasure being able to help support CNU and all these incredibly amazing projects that are coming so quickly. So I will, our next presenter who has graciously joined us is Dr. Christopher Pettit. He's a pediatric cardiologist. He's the chief of the Division of Cardiology at the Welton M. Gersony, and Division of Cardiology, sorry, Welton M. Gerson Professor of Pediatrics, and the Columbia Vagelos College of Physicians and Surgeons at Cincinnati Children's Hospital in Cincinnati, Ohio. And he's also the president of the Congenital Cardiac Research Collaborative, which is PC PAC3. I got that all right. I didn't mess it up, did I? I mean,
well, let me help you out.
CCRC. Sorry.
Jessica, let me help you out a little bit. First of all, thank you for
Thank
having
you.
me. And I'll make some minor tweaks to the introduction.
Thank you.
But thank you to the Masons also for sharing your story. And I know that the other medical people on the call will always agree that hearing your story always helps sharpen our focus and inspires us to sort of do what we do. I'm going to share my screen, and then while I'm doing that, Jessica, I'll just mention that I'm actually at Columbia in New York, not in Ohio, although I was born in Cleveland, so I saw someone who was wearing a Cleveland Browns shirt, and that made me happy.
I apologize for that. I don't know why that is all. Google was not correct.
No, that's totally fine. Don't worry about it.
Sorry
And then
about
also, I'm the president of the CCRC, which is the Congenital Cardiac Research Collaborative, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But just to dovetail off of what Sara Pasquali talked about, Cardiac Networks United brings to the table so much of the data which used to exist in these independent silos. And having all that information, all that data about children with congenital heart disease is a tremendous opportunity for us to ask good questions. And so science comes from asking good questions and then using the right techniques, the right approaches, the right analytics. Hopefully you arrive at the question that, you arrive at the answer to that question. In this trial, the COMPASS trial, which I'll speak about, is an example of using data that's available through Cardiac Networks United to answer a really important question in the field of congenital heart disease, particularly with babies born with cyanotic congenital heart disease. So the background here is that infants who are born with what we call cyanotic or blue, when they're blue babies who are born with that type of congenital heart disease, they require an intervention often in the first 30 days of life. And they can either be treated with a surgical shunt. Some people call that a BT shunt. You may have heard of that. But more recently, a non-surgical approach that's with a stent through a catheter procedure has been used for the same types of newborns. So the ductal artery stent procedure has been shown to be effective in many recent research studies. And so there have been some comparisons looking at the shunt, which is the traditional surgical approach to managing these babies, to this stent procedure, which is not surgery. And so the CCRC completed a study that was published in 2018 that looked at a group of infants that had congenital heart disease who were treated with a PDA stent compared to the surgical shunt. And we found that, there were some benefits to having the stent procedure compared to the classic sort of BT shunt procedure. And there was another study that was performed out of the United Kingdom at the same time that also came out. And it was a fairly similar message that there may be a reason to believe that doing the stent procedure for these babies was better than a shunt. Now, you could say, well, there you go. There's the answer. We're done. Let's move on to the next thing. Clearly, shunts are better. But in fact, if you peel back some of the layers of these studies, you realize that actually the devil's in the details here. And in fact, we didn't learn as much as we should have and need to learn more. And it has to do with the methods that we used to answer the question and the data that we used. So we're unable to really look at all babies in sort of an equal way. We don't know how many babies had an attempt at one type of procedure and then had to go to surgery to get the shunt procedure. So there may have been failed attempts, there may have been crossover. They tried one way, then they went to the other way. And also there were inherent differences in the groups of patients. And so some babies may have just deemed they were easier to sort of manage either way, and so they went into the cath lab for the stent procedure. And so inherent differences in groups made this really an unfair comparison. So in other words, there were apples and oranges kind of comparisons. And so the question remains, what is the real world experience? A baby born today in 2021 who has congenital heart disease, do we really know what's the best methods to manage them? And so we still don't really know, even though there's some evidence that maybe the stent procedure is preferable and the babies get home sooner, they eat by mouth better, and they grow and have a good complete repair when they're older. So the proposal that is this COMPASS trial is really a randomized clinical trial comparing this surgical shunt, which is this diagram here on the left. This is a BT shunt. It's a Gore-Tex tube graft that's sewn from one artery down to the pulmonary artery so that blood can go into the lungs. Comparing that to a stent, which is basically a coronary stent designed for adults with coronary blockages placed in the baby through one of their arteries to keep open the vessel that they're born with. So which of these is better, surgical shunt versus the ductal stent procedure? And so we'll compare the rates of major morbidity, mortality from the time that they have the procedure up until the time that they're 1 year of age. And our hypothesis is that the ductal stent will be associated with lower rates of major morbidity and mortality. There'll be a bunch of secondary aims, including how these babies grow, any complications that they might experience. We'll also look at some interesting things like how many days outside are they alive and outside of hospital in the first year of life. These are meaningful outcomes that I think all of us would understand to be really important. And most families ask about is, when can my baby come home and do they have to come back into the hospital? So we're hoping to understand some of those things as well. And again, our hypothesis is that hopefully with the ductal stent procedure, the non-surgical procedure, we'd have more favorable outcomes. We'll also collect some DNA for use in future studies. So this protocol, which will start hopefully this fall or maybe early winter, we aim to enroll 300 newborns who have cyanotic congenital heart disease, and they'll be randomized. So basically like a coin flip, and they'll be either receiving either a systemic to pulmonary shunt, the surgical shunt procedure, or the ductal artery stent procedure. And over 2 years, we hope to enroll all those 300 newborn babies, and each one of them will have 12 months of follow-up. So it's a 3-year study. It's a very ambitious study. In the field of congenital heart disease, this is a lot of patients, believe it or not. And we have a number of sites across North America. So sites in the United States, including Toronto and Canada. So it's a number of sites that will participate to make this a feasible, a doable study. And so I won't bore you with sort of the schematic here, but this trial is very unique. It's the first ever randomized trial in pediatric cardiology that will compare a surgical to a catheterization procedure. It's never been done before, and we're really excited. This is a question which is, we've wondered about for 15 years or more, and because of sort of the alignment of things like Cardiac Networks United, supported through Children's Heart Foundation, we can pull this off now. So this uses Cardiac Networks United registries to undertake the trial. I'll explain that in a little bit more detail here. So the data, so the information that's collected for this trial will really take advantage of existing CHD registries, namely two. PC4, which Dr. Chanani will talk about in a minute, and Ccrc, which is the group that I oversee. So here's kind of how the data will come in. So cath data, any data about reinterventions for these babies who are in the trial, when they have their surgical repair or if they get a bidirectional Glenn, that data would also come into Ccrc. A lot of their hospitalization data, and then when they turn 1 year of age, all that data will come into Ccrc. And then PC4, which Dr. Chanani can talk about, is really ICU, intensive care unit information about these babies. And some of the surgical data as well will go into PC4. Those two sources of information will pull to Cardiac Networks United, and Dr. Pasquali's team will then collate all of that data, which will be fed into the Pediatric Heart Network, which is really how the vast majority of trials in pediatric cardiology are performed. So it's really a unique data plan, which is we're hoping, and we fully expect this to be the method by which most of pediatric cardiac trials take place in the future. So this, we believe, COMPASS trial will be the first of many trials to go through this route. I won't talk too much about the registry, and I will just explain briefly who is Ccrc, because some of you may not have heard of us. We've been around for a few years. We started in 2015, but we are the Congenital Cardiac Research Collaborative. And we started off as just 4 centers, and now, just like Dr. Pasquali mentioned, we've grown so that in 2021 we are now 13 centers. Most recently, Columbia joined because I moved here from Atlanta. So we now have a number of sites, and we expect to grow even more in the next 2 years. It's a real meaningful collaboration, and our purpose is really to track the long-term outcomes. What's the long-term follow-up of children born with congenital heart disease? Much to your point, Patrick, we as clinicians, as physicians, really, we know what we can do, whether it's in the cath lab or in the operating room. We know what can be done, but what we don't know is what are the ramifications of that, not just when the baby goes home, but maybe 5 years, 10 years down the line. And so really the purpose of the CCRC is to measure the impact of the procedures we do today on the child and the young adult many years from now. And we're really focusing in on those populations, those children who are at risk, where they have a need for repeat interventions, or where their outcomes are currently disappointing. So we're not looking at things that are universally successful and they're easy to treat. We're looking at things that are hard to treat, or we're really still struggling, like tetralogy of flow, like cyanotic congenital heart disease, like HLHS, things like that. And we're really excited to be now a partner, a member of the Cardiac Networks United. For us, this is really the fulfillment of a long-term goal, which is sort of align ourselves with other really important registries and thought leaders in the field of pediatric cardiology and congenital heart disease. We're really indebted to a number of organizations and people, including the Children's Heart Foundation, for their support of Cardiac Networks United. CNU leadership has been really important for both the COMPASS trial, but also for CCRC directly. Obviously, the Pediatric Heart Network, which is funded through the NIH, is important for our work. And I'll just mention that I'm speaking about the COMPASS trial on behalf of a number of trial leadership members, including Sara Pasquali, who's also a good friend of mine, Andy Glatz, Jenna Romano, and Jeff Zampi. And I thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It's really interesting. Just a quick question about, will the difference in surgery versus catheterization, will that change outcomes as far as like long-term effects and outcomes? And, not just by the difference of procedure, but, does that, obviously it's less invasive, right? And less invasive means shorter recovery time. And so I would assume that all adds to a better long-term outcome, or is that something that you'll see as well, or possibly see?
That's a great question. I think we're all very interested in following this population. So if we can follow these 300 babies throughout their life and see what happens, and understand, when we truly randomize, truly assign them by a coin flip, so that we don't try to, tip the scales a little bit, but we really randomize them, we have the opportunity to really understand, is the non-surgical, the less invasive way of doing things, does that have payouts later on? So when they get to kindergarten, are they more school ready? Are they more coordinated and have better motor skills when they're teenagers, all that kind of thing. So I completely agree with you that we don't want to just assume that, oh, less invasive is better, it must be better because it's not surgery. We want to really measure this and then really track these patients. And with Pediatric Heart Networks, we kind of have some of the groundwork is laid out for our ability to do just that.
Thank you so much. Apologies again. Next we have Dr. Chanani, and I hope I know I've heard it. I'm sorry if I mispronounced it. He's a cardiologist at Sibley Heart Center in Atlanta at Emory University, and is the medical director of quality and outcomes. He's also a member of the executive committee of PC4, there's my PC4, which is the Pediatric Cardiac Critical Care Consortium.
All right, thank you, Jessica, I really appreciate it. Let me try and share my screen. This is always, I want to say, the hardest part of any presentation nowadays. Is it showing the right screen? I just want to make sure.
We don't see anything quite yet, no.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I have like 3 screens up, and I think I made a mistake doing it.
There you go.
Okay, great.
Got it.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate that. And thanks, Jessica, once again for introducing me. You know, Patrick, I appreciate hearing your story, especially about having to be in a children's hospital around the holidays. It's always, I think, one of the most challenging times for families, but it's also, I think, you know, we always try really hard around that time. I'll be honest, I've often worked many Christmases, and I think one of my favorite parts is we always have Santa that actually comes around. There's a multiple, and they often will round or hang out and see a lot of our patients. So I have a number of pictures of myself over the years with Santa rounding on Christmas. So, you know, it's probably one of the, unfortunately, one of the hardest times, but I think it can be a lot of fun, and the children's hospitals are always inherently fun, which is, I think, why most of us, like Dr. Pasquali and Dr. Pettit and myself, love working in a children's hospital. So, you know, I was going to spend just a few minutes just to follow up on what Dr. Pettit and Dr. Pasquali were touching base on this collaboration we have. So I work with the Pediatric Cardiac Critical Care Consortium, or as we affectionately call it, PC4. And PC4 was founded around a bunch of cardiac critical care units. So these are the ICUs where a lot of the children with heart disease come either before surgery or after surgery, after cardiac catheterization procedures like Dr. Pettit does, or other medical problems. And so what we recognize is, I think, you know, Patrick, your family very early recognizes that these conditions are rare. And when you work alone, you oftentimes don't realize what else is happening around the world. And so, you know, a group came together to try to very much answer those same questions that you guys raised. If we work together, maybe we'll learn more. And so that's fundamentally what we're about, is, you know, improving outcomes and quality through collaboration. And I think some of the things we do are, I think, really key to how we approach our patients and approach families. And we believe, you know, there's transparency. So we try to work together, share our data, learn from each other. I think that's important. I think for families, that's part of when you go to a hospital, you want to know that they're not just learning from themselves, but they're learning from others. We work across collaborations, disciplines. We partner with nurses, surgeons, physicians from all different walks. And so I think that's part of what we like to do. And then we measure what we do, and then we try to use that evidence to actually change what we do. And that's a big part of where Children's Heart Foundation and Cardiac Networks United comes in. You know, we work closely with the analytics, and a lot of what Children's Heart Foundation has done is help to fund a lot of that analytics and a lot of that support that goes into measuring and then implementing change. And this is where we are, you know, where we're pretty excited about the partnership with Dr. Pettit and CCRC and the Pediatric Heart Network as they perform this research study. So, you know, as we mentioned, these things are rare. Sorry, my slides, there we go. And by rare, then, if we need to work together to find it more, and I think PC4 brings together a lot of different sites. I think this map just gives you a sample of where all the sites are that are contributing to PC4 right now. So we now, you know, can work with sites from Seattle, Texas, Cleveland, California, all over, and that allows us to share our data to see what other centers are doing, see if they're doing something well, how we can do it better. But then for the very projects like Dr. Pettit's team is proposing, where you need 300 infants to be able to do this really important study, you're not going to find 300 infants in just Michigan or just Atlanta. You need Michigan and Atlanta and Columbia and Los Angeles. And so this is where this collaboration is really key to be able to answer these questions for all of our children, all of our patients. So historically, in a proposal like Dr. Pettit's, you know, where you're worried about children, you would propose your study, you would put together this very complicated report that would then need to be filled out by a bunch of research coordinators. And that would then be filled into Compass. And that's the historical model for a lot of the research studies that have been done in pediatrics and adult medicine. As you can imagine, though, that's pretty expensive, right? That's just a one-off study that you do for that one question, and then it goes away after that. What's really admirable and important about the study and the collaboration that's being proposed by Dr. Pettit is they're asking about the same patients, but they're now using this existing registry data. So they're taking data from PC4 and CCRC and combining it with Cardiac Networks United. So they're not having to create new reports. They're not having to hire new research coordinators at every center. This data already exists between CCRC and PC4, so you're not having to spend that money. You can answer a lot of these questions. In addition, you can also bring in centers that may not have the same resources. This gives a chance for small centers, medium centers, large centers to all partner in these important questions. So Compass opens the door to a lot of other centers. You're not just having the Atlantas, the Bostons, the Columbias, the Michigans answering questions. They're answering it, but then you also have centers that may not do as many, but are still taking care of these patients. So you have this new research model that not only is safe, and saves money, but it also allows a lot of other families that may never have had a chance to be a part of research to now be a part of it. So I think this is really, an important piece of this puzzle. And again, Children's Heart Foundation has been a huge supporter of Cardiac Networks United, and PC4 is, an integral member of CNU. So I think this partnership, the money that's invested in CHF and Children's Heart Foundation, which leads to CNU, really pays dividends when you think about how we can leverage that to service a lot of other families. So this is novel, and as Dr. Pettit mentioned, the hope is that this is going to be a model. Like, they've really brought something forward that's being done in some adult registries, but in pediatrics, this has not been done, not even in cardiology, but if you look at a lot of other pediatric research questions, it's not been done before. And if we do this successfully, not only are we going to be a model for our own patients, but really just a model in pediatrics and being able to leverage existing registries to answer important questions. So we're pretty excited about it. I know Dr. Pettit and Dr. Pasquali and the rest of the research team at CCRC are very excited about it. So we're hopeful that you guys can appreciate and have any questions about that. Please let us know. Stop sharing.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we're very excited about it as well. This is the first time hearing new updates, so it's really great. And any of these updates, we always get excited about. Our final presenter is Dr. Claudia Algaze, and I, again, hope I'm saying that correctly. She's a cardiologist at Stanford and the medical director of clinical effectiveness. And she is also the lead investigator of the target-based care project that she will be talking with you shortly. You might be on mute, maybe.
Of course, on mute. So I'll start again. It's not a virtual meeting without a double mute. So I was thanking Jessica as well as the Mason family for allowing me to participate in this virtual reception. I'm really happy here to present on behalf of our target-based care project team, our target-based care initiative. So we've heard about some very innovative research and platforms which are facilitating this research. My presentation is about quality improvement and the ability to do quality improvement across multiple centers toward really the goal of providing the best care that we can for our families and our patients. And so we know that there is variability among our families and children that we take care of. There's exquisite variability, and this variability we appreciate and we honor, and we try to do right by this variation. But in healthcare, there's also a separate variability that we call unnecessary variability or unwanted variability. And it's a very well-known entity that signals poor value. It signals poor healthcare and disparate outcomes and disparate quality among the patients that we're taking care of. And this is of high concern to us because we want to be able to provide consistent, high quality care to all families and all children, of course. And so like other centers across the nation and across the world, at Stanford, we really focused on trying to understand this variability to understand how we can tackle and improve it. And so we learn, as mentioned here, we really learn and change practice based on the data that's available to us. And so in traditional forums and traditional methodologies, this happens through conferences where we discuss the visible failures of our system. When something goes wrong and you can't ignore it, a patient does not make it, or we have a significant complication, and we really deep dive into what are the reasons for that and how can we improve. But as you can see below the line in blue, every patient's experience represents an important piece of this puzzle, and it's data that often goes undiscussed, unrecognized, and we're not able to understand what is it about the care that we're providing patients when things go right that we're able to harness and we're able to repeat. And what is it about the patients that their care doesn't necessarily signal us to have a very overt problem, but wasn't the best care that we could provide, and we still don't appreciate that data, and we're not able to use that data. So we've been very interested about, in particular, what's below the baseline. We wanted to understand, as a care team, do we have a shared mental model of what it takes to get a child through surgery and get them home safely to their parents? And so we did a simple survey at our hospital. We surveyed multiple members of the care team, just asking simple question: how long do you think for this surgery, say a Glenn surgery, how long do you think it takes to get the breathing tube out? How long do you think it takes in general, in an uncomplicated case, to get a patient out of the ICU and to get them home? And we were really surprised by the answers that we got. We thought that we would have a shared mental model of these milestones in patients' care toward their discharge home. But we really got very widespread answers, and this was of significant concerns. Even seasoned cardiologists had widespread views of how our patients actually do. And so we recognize that this impacts our ability to evaluate how is a patient doing relative to other patients. Because, for example, if we can't evaluate that, how can we evaluate if a patient is stalling and we need to look in further as to what are the reasons for them stalling? How can we help them progress? It, I think, impacts the ability for us to communicate with patients and families, impacts the consistency in which we serve our patients and our families, and really importantly, the ability to have a benchmark from which to continue to improve. So we hypothesized then, what if we could look at our own local data, really from our electronic health record, and try to understand what does, let's say, a 2-year period of patients having a particular surgery, what does their length of stay look like overall? And simply take the average and present that average as an achievable benchmark, because it's represented by our own data, our own experience, and provide that information to providers, patients, their families at the point of care from the time they get out of surgery till the time they go home. Would we be able to get a shared mental model and impact the way we're taking care of patients by providing that just-in-time data? So hence was born target-based care within our organization. It's a very simple tool that really takes any type of surgery that a patient's going to have, looks at our historical information to generate a patient population that would be similar to the patient that's going to have a surgery or a procedure, and then puts that information at the bedside at the point of care. This is what it looks like. As I said, it's a very simple intervention. You can see a blurb to the parents that basically says, these goals have been established by a review of our similar patients within our local hospital, but you your child is different and therefore may meet goals at a different time. And then there's a separate blurb for providers. Try to meet or beat these goals, for example, safely. And then it provides us with a benchmark from which to compare and from which to improve. Some of the reasons that we think target-based care is successful or impactful are the following listed here. Really, it promotes this mutual understanding of a situation and creates commonality of effort. So we're all looking at a fish, right, as you see in the diagram here. Facilitates effective communication, and that's not only communication among providers, but with families. Enables prediction, anticipation of potential problems, or of what is an anticipated course and how we can counsel families as such. Enables us to think about and enact practice changes. And ultimately, I think most importantly, is to create a continuous learning system in which the experience of every patient leads to the improvement of care for each subsequent patient. And that's ultimately my career passion. So what we've seen within our local results is reduced, and this is just an example because, I think it wouldn't be fair to show you all of our data in one presentation here, but this is a consistent representation of what we see, and what we've seen at Stanford is a reduction in variability. You can see the lines were wide, and then in the right-hand side, they're narrower. You can see an improvement of overall outcomes. Shown here is a reduction of length of stay, so getting kids out of the hospital earlier and safer. And I think very importantly, a transformation into a continuous learning system. So each patient can be evaluated and we can see what's associated with really good care and what's associated with things that we need to improve, and then systematically make targeted changes to the way we're taking care of patients. Of course, everything is a balance. So when we started this program, I would say, we perseverated on what would the family experience, how would the families take this type of intervention? So after each family left the hospital, we called the families. So I would say we called about 150 families, 7 days after their discharge and 30 days after their discharge. And we really wanted to understand, did you feel like you were being rushed out of the hospital? Did you feel ready to leave the hospital once you were discharged? And we were very excited that almost all our families actually responded, and the family satisfaction was quite high. I would say no family felt like they were rushed out of the institution or felt they weren't ready to go home. We also looked at what's called rebalancing metrics around the same outcomes that we were looking at. So for example, if we were looking at targets to time to get the breathing tube out and time to get out of the ICU and go home, we looked at, were patients getting their breathing tubes placed back in? Were they being readmitted to the ICU, or were they being readmitted to the hospital? And really, we found that the data was comparable to before target-based care went live. So there were really no adverse consequences to an intervention that was showing really positive outcomes. We even got a poem, actually my colleague Andy Shin, who is really a co-director in this program, one of the families we took care of gave him this poem by Ambroise Bierce, and I'll read it. "You acted unwisely, I cried, as you see by the outcome. He calmly eyed me. When choosing a course of action, he said, I had not the outcome to guide me." And the family went on to say, "The physicians and nurses caring for my son were in fact guided by the outcomes of the many patients before him, and we are grateful for this lacking factor." Despite the success that we had at Stanford, our story would have ended if not for the introduction of Cardiac Networks United, as supported by the Children's Heart Foundation. we had early discussions around the potential to take this tool that was very useful in our organization and try it among multiple centers in which they might also find it useful. And the ultimate tool would be much greater than the tool that we designed in our own institution. After initial conversations, we had a summit at Stanford, really with interesting parties, with members of Cardiac Networks United leadership. And it led to the project that we've been doing now for about 6 months. This project is extremely well supported by not only the Cardiac Networks United sponsors you see here, but by a team of data scientists, quality improvement scientists, and that make the project, have made the project much greater than we could ever imagine. So far, we have 18 centers participating with us, trying to understand how this tool can be useful at their institutions and how can they improve that tool so that we as a community can use it even with better impact than we had envisioned just at Stanford. And with that, I'd like to thank the Micah Mason Foundation. Thank you to the Masons for allowing us to present today. Thank you to the Children's Heart Foundation for your support of Cardiac Networks United, and appreciate the Target-Based Care Project team and our collaborators. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was fascinating, and I can't wait to see more data come out of these projects. And maybe we have time for a couple questions. If anyone has any questions for our doctors.
I have one question specific to the which HLHS. Is the STIP procedure even possible with that disorder, or do you have to have a surgical?
You're referring to the
Hypoplastic left ventricular.
Right. Yeah. So the stent procedure that I was talking about, there is another sort of version of the Norwood operation that Micah underwent, but it's not as simple as the one that I described in the Compass trial. So that's certainly something else that may come to fruition once we get the right kind of devices developed and all that. But right now, it's always going to be a surgery until we get the right technology.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, if anyone has any questions, please think of them later. Feel free to email me, and I'm happy to pass them along and see if we can get some answers for you. But I will turn it back over to Patrick for some final words.
Well, I want to start by saying thank you to all the presenters. I appreciate you giving us your time and showing off your research. It's all really cool stuff. I'm looking forward to the results. And everybody else that came, I really appreciate your support, both now and over the years. I know it's been a long 5.5 years so far, and we've appreciated your support the whole time. And now we're asking for your support with funding research projects so that when we do the second annual research reception, we are going to have doctors on who are talking about the projects we funded. So that's the hope and the goal. So the Micah Mason Research Fund, if you go to our website, micahmasonfoundation.com, and there's a partnerships page. If you go to the partnerships page, it links to the fund with the Children's Heart Foundation. And so I would ask that you consider donating to the fund and head over there. And if you have any questions about how to do that, feel free to call, text, call my dad, call Janelle, however you need to get a hold of us. So Thank you all again. We appreciate it. And if you have any questions,
Patrick, just one question. Is the Micah Mason Fund a 501c3 fund? Because it makes a difference on where the funds might come from to donate.
Right. So both the Micah Mason Foundation and the Children's Heart Foundations are 501c3 organizations. So whether you give the money directly to us or you put it into the fund, it's going to be a tax deductible donation.
Okay. Well, I'm not worried about the tax deduction. But it makes a difference on where the money what pocket the money may come out of.
Yeah, I understand. I got you. So, but yes, they're both 501c3s.
Okay.
Yeah, that's step number one when you form a charity. you go to the IRS.
Okay, that answers my question.
All right. Yeah, it was a good one, easy one. Any other questions? All right. If not, thank you all very, very much for coming. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us.
Hosting.
Nice to meet you all.
All right.
Thank you. Have a great night, everyone.
Take
Hey.
care.
Bye.
Hey everybody, thanks for watching our video. We appreciate the support and I hope it was informative. As you may or may not know, the Micah Mason Foundation has formed a partnership with the Children's Heart Foundation to create a named fund, and Micah's name is the Micah Mason Research Fund. And the goal is to raise $100,000 in order to fund a research project that will hopefully go on to save Micah's life and the lives of other children who have hypoplastic left heart syndrome. Right now, we've got a long way to go to 100K. So I want to ask you if you would be interested in donating to the Micah Mason Research Fund. We'd appreciate your donation, and all funds go to the research and go to help save our children. So if you can spare even $2 to $3, anything would help. $20, $30, $10,000. If you happen to have that. If you do happen to have that, that'd be excellent. But even $5 helps. And on top of that, right now we do have a matching donor, so anything you give will be doubled. And we really appreciate your support and your help. If you want to donate, go to www.micahmasonfoundation.org and click on the donate link. That'll take you to a way to donate via PayPal and our address if you'd like to send us a check. The alternate way, if you want to donate directly to the Micah Mason Research Fund via the Children's Heart Foundation, go to micahmasonfoundation.org and click on Partners, and there's a link there to give directly to the fund via credit card. And we thank you for your support. Check out our other videos, and remember, we're all in this together.